I still remember the exact moment those words left his mouth. The CEO's voice cut through the boardroom like a blade. "No one touches this file." He said it calmly, almost casually, but the weight of the warning was unmistakable. The folder sat right there in front of him, thick, unmarked, held together by a single brass clip. It wasn't locked away in a safe or sealed in some digital vault. No, it was sitting out in plain sight, as though daring someone to defy the rule. I was just a junior analyst, a name no one remembered in a company where titles mattered more than people. I'd been hired 6 months earlier, still learning the corridors, still fumbling through the endless protocols that governed everything. Yet that day, as the CEO tapped the folder with 2 fingers and narrowed his eyes, I felt something inside me stir. Curiosity.
Dread.
A pull I couldn't quite explain. What made it worse was the way everyone else reacted. The directors shifted in their chairs, some nodding, some lowering their gaze as though the file was radioactive. The silence was thick, complicit. And then, just like that, the meeting moved on. They spoke about markets, projections, mergers. But my eyes kept drifting back to that folder. Unlabeled, forbidden, and glowing in my mind like a red warning light. 4 days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why forbid it? Why leave it visible? The company had plenty of confidential materials, usually buried in encrypted servers. This was different. This was personal. The breaking point came late one night, when I stayed behind to finish a report. The office was silent, just the hum of the air conditioning and the glow of fluorescent lights. And there it was again on the corner of the CEO's desk. I don't know what gave me the nerve. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the feeling that my whole life had been circling some hidden truth. I reached for the file, heart pounding, fingers trembling. I flipped it open and froze. My father's name was there. Page after page, document after document. His signature. His handwriting. His life, written in ink where it never should have been. That was the moment I knew. Nothing in my family was what it seemed. Sometimes the rules we're told not to break are the ones that lead us to the truth we most need to face. I should tell you a little about my father before you understand the storm that was about to break open. To most people, he was an ordinary man. A schoolteacher. The kind of father who ironed his shirts on Sunday evenings, who drove the same dented sedan for 20 years, who clipped coupons from the newspaper even when we didn't need to. He believed in fairness, in hard work, in never owing a man more than you could pay back with your hands or your word. But to me, he was also a mystery. He carried silence like a second skin. He never spoke about his youth, never mentioned old friends, never even told us much about where he. If I asked, he'd smile faintly, change the subject, or hand me a chore to do. My mother, who adored him, used to say, "Your father is a man who puts the past in its place." And for most of my life, I accepted that. We weren't rich, but we were steady. There was food on the table, laughter at Christmas, and the quiet reassurance that my father's word was as solid as oak. I never thought to question the silence. Until that night in the CEO's office. The company I worked for wasn't just any company. It was an old, sprawling conglomerate that touched everything from construction to shipping to finance. People whispered that its roots ran deeper than the government itself. Getting a job, there was supposed to be the dream. My dream. Except it wasn't me who had pushed for it. It was my father. When I got the offer, I expected him to be proud. Instead, he went pale. He pulled me aside, gripped my shoulders with a force I'd never felt before, and said, "Be careful in that place. Do not draw attention. Do not dig where you're not invited." At the time, I brushed it off as protective worry. But standing there with that forbidden file open, his name staring back at me in black ink, his warning suddenly roared in my ears. Why was my father's life tied to this company? Why was the CEO guarding these papers like holy scripture? And why had my father, who never wanted more than a classroom and a quiet life, urged me into this den of secrets? That night, as I slid the file back into place, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't just an employee. I was a piece on a board I didn't even know existed. Sometimes the past we think is buried has already been written into the future we're living. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of the file still pressing against my chest, as though I had smuggled it home in my sleep. I couldn't shake the images, the signatures, the contracts, the faint pencil notes scrawled in margins that looked exactly like the handwriting I had grown up watching on birthday cards and grocery lists. But with the shock came a problem. I had broken the one commandment the CEO had made. No one touches this file. And I had touched it. Not only touched it, but read it, absorbed it, carried it like a brand under my skin. The first sign that someone might suspect came almost immediately. When I walked into the office, the receptionist, who never looked up from her desk, gave me a sharp glance, like she knew I was out of place. Later that day, a senior manager stopped by my cubicle, his questions about my workload oddly pointed, as though he was probing for something unsaid. And then there was the CEO himself. During a routine meeting, his eyes swept over the room, pausing on me a fraction longer than anyone else. It was nothing, but it was everything. I realized then that the file wasn't just forbidden, it was a test. Not for the others, but for me. The company operated on rules that no handbook explained. They weren't written down, but everyone knew them. Loyalty over truth, obedience over curiosity, silence over justice. And now, by opening that folder, I had broken every one of them. Still, another rule began to take shape in my mind. One my father had unknowingly planted in me through years of quiet lessons. When something feels wrong, you don't close your eyes. You face it. You keep walking, even if your knees shake. So, I set a test of my own. I would not run. I would not confess. I would keep going, quietly, carefully, and see how deep my father's name ran in this empire. If they suspected me, they'd reveal their hand. And if they didn't, I'd find a way to uncover why a schoolteacher from a small town was inked into the secret heart of a corporation that spanned continents. Every night after that, I lingered a little longer in the office. Sometimes I managed to slip a page into my briefcase, tucked between spreadsheets no one cared about. Sometimes all I could do was memorize a name or a number before the janitor's cart squeaked down the hall. Piece by piece, I began to assemble the shape of a story my father had never told me. The file had rules. The company had rules. But so did I. And mine, though quiet, were stronger. Because sometimes the truest test isn't whether you obey, it's whether you dare to seek the truth at all. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. At first, the documents were just contracts, agreements between the company and smaller firms. But then I started noticing a pattern. Almost every third or fourth page carried my father's name in some corner, like a ghostly watermark. Sometimes as a witness, sometimes as a signatory, and once, shockingly, as the author of an entire memorandum. But the dates didn't line up. These papers stretched back 30 years, long before I was born. And according to every story my father had ever told, back then he was teaching middle school, grading essays, and coaching soccer in the afternoons. How could he have been doing both at once? One night, I smuggled out a photocopy of a letter. The paper was yellowed, but the ink was sharp. It bore the company's seal at the top, with my father's name signed beneath a passage about project continuance and asset relocation. I didn't know what those terms meant, but I knew the signature was his. I'd seen it 1,000 times before on permission slips and checks. I stared at the letter for hours in my apartment, the same way a child stares at the night sky, trying to make sense of unfamiliar constellations. There were other oddities, too. Names of companies that no longer existed. Addresses that led to abandoned warehouses when I checked them online. A recurring symbol, a small sketch of a key in the margins of certain documents. At first I thought it was just doodling, but then I noticed it matched a brass key my father kept on his keychain, one he never used but never removed either. Every discovery left me with more questions than answers. Why the secrecy? Why the symbols? And why did so many of the pages reference places in our own hometown, as if the story had been playing out under my nose all along. The hardest part was keeping it from my father. Each Sunday dinner, I'd watch him spoon mashed potatoes onto his plate, the same calm, familiar man I'd always known. And yet, now I saw shadows around him, ghosts of boardrooms and contracts and keys drawn in margins. Once, I nearly blurted it out. I wanted to hold up the letter and say, "Explain this." But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was respect. Or maybe it was the quiet hope that if I dug far enough, the truth would reveal itself without tearing him apart. So I kept searching. The company was a labyrinth, and the file was the thread I followed. But like any maze, the deeper you go, the more you realize there are walls you can't see until you hit them. And I was about to hit one very hard. Because one night, as I slid another page into my briefcase, I heard a voice behind me.
Calm.
Cold.
Certain.
You've seen too much, haven't you? Truth has a way of showing up exactly when you feel most unprepared. I froze. The voice belonged to someone I had never spoken to before, though I had seen him in passing. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that came from a lifetime of command. I knew instantly who he was, the chairman of the board. Higher even than the CEO, though rarely seen in the building. A shadow who only emerged when something truly mattered. I turned slowly, my heart battering my ribs. He was standing in the doorway of the records room, his hands clasped behind his back. There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice. Just certainty, like a man who already knew the ending to the story. "Don't bother denying it," he said, stepping inside. "Curiosity runs in your blood, just as it did in your father's." The floor seemed to tilt under me. My father. Again. Always my father. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice breaking. The chairman studied me for a long moment, then gave a soft, almost amused smile. "You really don't know, do you? He never told you." I shook my head, gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. "Your father wasn't just a schoolteacher," he said finally. "He was one of us."
Once.
Before he walked away. The room felt too small, the walls closing in. "One of you," I repeated. He nodded. He was brought in decades ago. Bright, meticulous, incorruptible, or so he claimed. He helped build the foundations of what you now see as this empire. He held the keys, quite literally, to things even the CEO doesn't fully understand. His gaze flicked to the folder I had been rifling through. "That's why his name is everywhere. This company was shaped by your father's hand as much as anyone's."
My mean spoon.
My father, the man who spent evenings marking history quizzes at the kitchen table, had once sat in rooms like this, drafting the very documents I was risking my career to uncover. "But he left," I said, almost to myself. "Yes," the chairman replied, his tone sharpening. "He walked away. He abandoned us. And people do not simply walk away from this." The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken threats. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. The chairman leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because your father's story is not finished. And whether you like it or not, you're already part of it." Then he turned and walked out, leaving me with the echo of his words. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, one truth became impossible to ignore. The secret file wasn't about history. It was about inheritance. Sometimes the revelation we fear most is the one that tells us who we truly are. After that night, nothing felt safe anymore. Not the office, not the streets outside, not even my own apartment. I started noticing small things, lights that seemed to linger on too long in the parking garage, footsteps behind me that vanished when I turned, phone calls with silence on the other end. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it wasn't. The chairman's words echoed constantly. Your father's story is not finished. At home, I found myself staring at my father in a new light. Every gesture, every pause, every silence was a riddle. One evening, as he washed the dishes, I caught sight of the brass key on his keychain again. It was worn smooth, the kind of metal polished by decades of touch. I asked him, as casually as I could, "What's that key for?" He dried his hands slowly, glanced at me, and for the briefest second, something flickered across his face, a flash of memory, or fear, or both. Then he slipped it back into his pocket and said, "Just an old habit. Doesn't open anything anymore." But I didn't believe him. Meanwhile, the company's attitude toward me shifted. I was invited to meetings I had no business being in. I was given assignments that seemed meaningless on the surface, compiling lists of names, cross-referencing shipments, but which, when compared against the documents I had copied, began forming a web of old alliances, secret transactions, shell companies scattered across the globe. It was as if they were testing me, watching to see if I would understand the pattern. And the more I understood, the more dangerous it felt. One night, I confronted my mother. "What did Dad do before teaching?" I asked her. She looked startled, then forced a laugh. "You know what he did. He worked in accounting for a bit, then got his teaching certificate." "Why are you asking now?" But her eyes darted away when she spoke. And I knew then she had been keeping the same silence all along. The real breaking point came when I received a sealed envelope in my office inbox. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, my father, standing beside. That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The brass key in my father's pocket had become the center of my world. But how could I ask for it without revealing what I knew? And if I pushed too hard, would I risk losing the only thing more fragile than truth? Trust? Sometimes the closer you come to an answer, the more the questions close in around you. I couldn't carry the weight of silence anymore. The photograph in my drawer was burning a hole through my days, and the key in my father's pocket might as well have been a ticking clock. One Sunday evening, after dinner, I asked him to sit with me on the porch. The night was cool, the air still. Crickets chirped in the distance, filling the spaces where my courage faltered. "Dad," I began, my voice low, "I know about the company. I know your name is in their files. And I know the chairman remembers you." His hand, which had been resting on the arm of his chair, clenched into a fist. For a moment, I thought he might stand and walk away. But instead, he let out a long breath and said, "I told you never to dig." "I had to," I said, feeling my throat tighten. "They're watching me.
They're using me.
And I need to know why. What's the truth?" He sat in silence for what felt like hours, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out the brass key, and turned it over in his palm. "This key," he said slowly, "is the last piece of a lock I spent half my life building, and the other half trying to destroy." He told me then what he had never told anyone, that he had been recruited by the company in his 20s, dazzled by the promise of influence and wealth, that he had written contracts, drawn maps, moved assets that shaped the backbone of an empire, that the projects weren't just business ventures, they were pipelines for power, for control, for keeping governments and whole communities tied to invisible strings. "I thought I could outsmart them," he confessed. "I thought if I stayed honest inside a dishonest system, I could balance the scales. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. There is no balance. Only chains." The key, he explained, was one of several. Each opened a safe hidden in different corners of the world, each containing records that could bring the company down. When he tried to walk away, they let him leave, but only because they believed he would never risk using it. I stared at the key in his hand, the symbol I had seen all my life without understanding. "Why keep it then?" I asked. "Because," he said, his eyes glistening, "someday someone might be brave or foolish enough to finish what I could not." Before I could reply, headlights swept across the porch. A car pulled into the driveway. Black, unmarked. Two men stepped out. My father pressed the key into my palm and whispered, "Run." Sometimes the moment of truth doesn't arrive quietly. It roars into your life with no way back. I didn't run right away. My legs wanted to, but my heart wouldn't let me. The two men stepped out of the car with the calmness of professionals. No uniforms, no badges, just the quiet assurance of people who never heard the word no. They approached the porch, their eyes fixed on my father. "You should have stayed gone," one of them said. His voice was clipped, rehearsed, like he'd delivered this line before. My father stood slowly, his frame smaller than theirs, but his presence larger. "And you should have learned," he answered, "that some things can't be buried forever." I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but I felt the key pressing into my palm like a brand. My father's grip had been firm, deliberate. This wasn't just about him, it was about me now, about carrying forward what he had started. The men tried to step closer, but my father moved between them and me, his voice steady. "If you touch him, you'll never find it." For a moment, no one breathed. Then, surprisingly, they stopped. One of the men gave a thin smile.
"We'll be watching," he said.
And with that, they turned and left, their car disappearing into the night as quickly as it had come. I looked at my father, my chest heaving. What just happened? Why didn't they take it? Why didn't they? Because, he interrupted, they don't know if I gave you the key or not. And fear of the unknown is the only power we still have over them. That night, he finally laid everything bare. The network of safes, the documents they held, the way each piece connected to the company's hidden skeleton. He had tried years ago to rally others to expose it, but fear won. People folded. Some disappeared. He chose survival for himself, for my mother, for me. And now, by accident or fate, the burden was mine. "Listen to me," he said, his voice cracking with urgency. "This key is not about revenge. It's about choice. You can live quietly, pretend none of this exists, and maybe they'll let you be. Or you can unlock the truth. But if you do, it won't just change your life, it will change everything." I sat there in the dark, the key heavy in my palm, knowing there was no easy road. My father had lived half a life in silence. I wasn't sure I could do the same. In that moment, I understood what legacy really meant. Not wealth, not status, but the courage or failure to confront the truth when it finally stares you in the face. Sometimes the heaviest inheritance isn't money or property. It's unfinished battles. It has been months since that night on the porch, but the memory feels sharper than the present. The car's headlights fading into the darkness, the weight of the brass key in my hand, my father's tired but unshaken eyes. These are the images that replay whenever I wonder if I made the right choice. The key is hidden now. Not in a bank, not in a safe, not anywhere predictable. Some days I take it out just to feel its cold shape against my skin. A reminder that silence is the easier road, but never the truer one. I haven't used it. Not yet. I've traced a few of the leads, pieced together fragments of what's inside those safes, and I know that if I open even one, the world I know will tilt. Governments, markets, reputations, it would all shift. The company pretends not to see me now, but I know their eyes are there, waiting, measuring. My father walks lighter since that night. He knows I carry the choice, and for the first time, I think he believes I might carry it well. He still teaches, still irons his shirts on Sundays, still spoons potatoes at dinner. But I see it in him, the relief of a man who finally spoke the truth.